Hey there, everyone. This is just a brief summary of one of the blog posts we put up this week, talking about the three biggest mistakes that hurt small business during our response to COVID. This isn't a total sad story. We do have the chance to make it a happy ending after all, but that's going to take some work on our part. This video is just a short synopsis of what's written in the blog post, which is on the screen below. And we'll take you through some of the key highlights and key learnings from our analysis. All right, so if we took a time machine back into March, I think all of us would agree that we all believe that COVID was going to be a short-term hit, both from a health standpoint and also from an economic standpoint. We felt that this would be a short-term hit, 8 to 12 weeks, and therefore the legislation that came out from Congress and the CARES Act was designed as such. The Paycheck Protection Program covered us for 8 to 10 weeks, and the Economic Injury and Disaster Loan, otherwise known as the EIDL, was also geared to that type of outage for working capital. Unfortunately, we all learned that that wasn't the case, and so now we're dealing with some of those consequences. The second big mistake was that the Paycheck Protection Program would be distributed to who needed it, to those who needed it most. As you know, the intent was to get that Paycheck Protection Program to small businesses. Why? Small businesses don't have the access to other forms of capital that major companies and major corporations do. Therefore, cash is usually very tight in small businesses, and working capital is not something there is an excess of. Therefore, the Paycheck Protection Program was a way to bridge that gap while there was no revenue so that they can continue to keep people employed. And lastly, and sadly, I think that no one quite understood the impact of the misinformation that was going out in March around the mixed messages that was being sent about COVID. One only needs to take a look at our response as a nation to other countries around the globe, where they were able to flatten their curves and not have a second wave or not ending the first wave while we were not. There's probably a couple reasons why. There's many studies on this. I'm not going to get into right, left, center, backwards, forwards, whatever. The point being is that there was clearly areas where disinformation was coming out. If you lived in an area that was impacted, obviously there was plenty of your own personal experience that could counter that misinformation. If you were in a different area where your experiences were different and you didn't see things that would contradict that misinformation, it was a lot easier to be believed. Unfortunately, because of these three colossal blunders, we've probably done the maximum amount of damage to small business possible. So now I'm going to show a few graphs that represent the impact that these errors had on small business. And I think two of the most glaring areas were in how the PPP was actually distributed and how we responded versus reopening. So the first major impact that these blunders had on small business was the PPP. The PPP was not distributed where it was needed most. There's several studies that show this. We put a small chart together to highlight some of these points. What you'll see on this chart is looking at the dollars per capita that were spent per number of days that the businesses were closed. For example, even in South Dakota, where they had 0 days closed, they got $1,500 and some per person, where in New York you got somewhere around 10. You can see the stark differences between the top 10 and top 10 from impacted to not impacted, and the major impact that had on the dollars that were spent and the dollars that were available. The second, and frankly sadder, impact came from our choices in reopening, which we're living through today, and we'll probably continue to live through for the foreseeable future. As you'll see on this chart, areas, as we compare the number of cases that an area was experiencing in April versus the number of cases that same area is experiencing now in July, we see some stark patterns and some major differences. For areas that opened after May 15th with mask restrictions, we've seen a reduction in case count by about 4 to 20 times. Conversely, for those places that opened before May 15th without mask wearing mandates, they saw an increase in caseload of 2 to 12%. And that's sad because that increased caseloads means increased deaths. There's no way around it. And importantly, from this perspective, I'm not talking about the personal health perspective, but the business perspective, it just prolongs the agony. Places that were open are now going to have to close, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, so what does all this mean? So it comes down to really three things. We can't pretend that COVID is in the past. It is not. No matter how you slice it, it is not. So we need to continue to wear our masks and do what we need to do to keep the businesses that are open, and to try to avoid further closures. It's been incredibly damaging to all small businesses in all regions, and this behavior needs to stop. Secondly, we need to look at how we're going to help fund ourselves. I mean, the cavalry is not coming. We assumed in our original legislation that this was a short-term thing, not a 6-month thing. So 8 to 10 weeks doesn't cover you for 26. And therefore, some small businesses, as pointed out in Bloomberg, are rapidly on the track to bankruptcy. We need to change that. And then finally, and most importantly, is consumers are spooked, customers are spooked. They're not spending. Bloomberg was quoted as saying that consumer spending is about 40% of where it was pre-pandemic. We need it to be about 60% at minimum in order to keep these businesses afloat. And the only way that we'll be able to do that is by reducing the fear and ensuring people are able to be safe and will have jobs. That will keep them spending and keep the economy going. No, I'm not all doom and gloom, frankly. I like to, sometimes it may seem very pessimistic, or I'm a little dry on the delivery, but believe me, I believe this country can do this. And there are 3 things to turn this around that can really make this become a happy ending. Number 1, we have to correct misinformation anytime we hear it. Frankly, I was a little afraid to do this post because I can see the trolls crawling out from underneath the bridges, but things have to be said. This has to be dealt with, and if we don't do it, who will? And if we don't do it now, when's it going to happen? Secondly, and most importantly, is we have to band together. This cannot be a Northeast thing, sunbelt thing, your thing, my thing, us, them. No, it's us. We rise and fall all together. It's impossible to keep this contained in one place. Our economy doesn't work that way. And frankly, one business's suffering is no worse than another. The virus doesn't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether you believe mainstream media or not mainstream media. The point is, it'll kill you just the same. And therefore, we need to take protections and start to treat this as a country rather than multiple sets of tribes. Finally, and the most important thing I'd love to leave you with is we have to find a way to make consumers and our customers feel comfortable. Without that, they're not going to spend. And if they do not spend, consumer spending makes up the majority of the U.S. economy. If they are not out there spending, we will not be in business, period. So to make this a happy ending for us and have a Merry Christmas is to ensure that the consumers come back in the fall and feel comfortable about shopping and comfortable about being out and about without the fear of getting infected or infecting others. So I hope you enjoyed this short synopsis. If you want to read the whole blog, again, it's at the bottom. I encourage you to do so. It's very detailed. I think we did a great job in trying to share the facts and keep it fact-based, and hopefully you'll agree. And if you believe that this is worth doing, I encourage you to share this, and I encourage you to take the 3 steps that we talked about in this short synopsis. All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for listening, and talk to you soon. Take care.